Welcome into the Door Report. It is episode 182. It is a Tuesday night, September 27th. We are powered by Alaco Fine Wood Floors, family owned and operated for more than 2 decades. Alaco Fine Wood Floors is Nashville and Middle Tennessee's choice for premium quality hardwood floors. Since 1995, Jimmy Alaco and his army of employees have embodied the approach of taking pride in one's craft and providing superior customer service. Growing from a one-man shop to a team of 23 professionals who share the founder's passion for quality craftsmanship and customer satisfaction. If you're interested in contacting them, you can find their headquarters at 2505 Winford Avenue in Berry Hill, or you can call them at 615-356-0303, or check them out at their website, alacofinewoodfloors.com. Alaco Fine Wood Floors, serving Middle Tennessee's hardwood flooring needs since 1995. All right, Will, let's kind of intro this and kind of tell the listeners what we're going to talk about, because yes, this is technically the Alabama recap, but let's face it, there's not a whole lot to get to from that game. We do have our three takeaways. We're not going to go quarter by quarter analysis, so we're not going to do that, but we do have our three key takeaways. And Will, I like how you put it here in the script. Almost halfway through the season, where can this team improve? This is going to be more of a State of the Union address for Vanderbilt football heading into the bye week, and we will dive into kind of, we'll put ourselves in the coach's office in that locker room and say, all right, what does this team need to do? So it'll be more of that than an Alabama recap, and I think people would be happy to hear that.
Yeah, you said beforehand, maybe don't title this episode the Alabama recap. Maybe title it the midterm progress report or something
Yes.
like that for the season. Because I don't think this game necessarily tells you anything about this team in the broader terms. I think there were individual plays and individual players and matchups won throughout that game that maybe you could take some things away from this game. But overall, we said before this season started and leading up to this Alabama game that this 3 week stretch or 3 game stretch, as there's the bye week halfway through here before the Ole Miss game, that you can't let that change your perception of this team going in to this 3 game stretch, because you're 3-1, you've beaten the teams you're supposed to. You had an okay showing against Wake Forest that just barely lost to Clemson in overtime in kind of gut wrenching fashion as they kind of came back there. So obviously a very good team in Wake Forest. So don't take 2 of your next 3 games being against 2 of the top 4 teams in the country and let that shape how you're feeling about the state of the program, because just take a step back and remember how it felt before the beatdown that Vanderbilt football took 55-3 against Alabama last Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, let's be real. It's not like we were surprised by this going into this game, even before this season. We expected going into this season, Alabama and Georgia. Those are the games where you just got to kind of throw everything out, and you really can't analyze those two games the way you do every other game. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at this game and more so project ahead to this season for this team and say, hey, where are the areas? Where are the areas that we both think this team has to improve to get that SEC win? Because we've seen, Will, South Carolina is beatable, Missouri is beatable. And I know Florida, they looked really good against Tennessee. I still think Vandy has a shot there, an outside shot of competing in that game. So we'll go through that, kind of project ahead a little bit. Before we do that, though, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at @door_report and Instagram Door.report. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our podcast is available on Anchor, iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And while you're at it, give our podcast 5 stars and a review on iTunes. All right, let's get to the Alabama recap. All right, well, let's I know, after this game, yes, there's not a whole lot to get to in terms of, what we saw on the field. I know in that first quarter, especially offensively, we saw that Vanderbilt offense do some things, a couple things that, watching the game as a Vanderbilt person, you're saying, uh-oh, I mean, we didn't even really expect this. You saw the fade there to Shepard down that right side. That was really only sign of life in that first half, and then in the second half they didn't. I mean, that was the longest pass play, I think, Will, if I'm not mistaken. But real quick, Will, just kind of your initial thoughts. How surprised were you by anything you saw? Because I know from my perspective, I really wasn't. But I know from Clark, I'll say this: I know from Clark Lea's perspective, and I heard him say this in the press conference. Getting to 55, I know he doesn't look at the score and say, "Oh, we didn't want them to get to 50," but I know he believes they should not have given up that last touchdown. I know that's a not the biggest deal, at least from the outside, but I do think there were things in this game that Clark Lee said, we didn't play well. I know, from a fan's perspective, you don't expect to go and win this game, but Clark Lee and in that locker room, they believed they could have played better. And there were moments, Will, I mean, that you look at and you say, hey, maybe they could have scored a touchdown. Maybe maybe they could have made a stop here or there. So, but real quick here, and kind of initial thoughts and kind of were you surprised by anything you saw?
No, not at all. I think we were both a little optimistic in our projections of how this game was going to go and what we expected offensively. I think we were both very realistic defensively. I think what was your score prediction? I think mine was 52-17.
I think mine was 48-14. So offensively they were way off, but defensively,
yeah,
I mean, we knew Alabama
just expected. I think that the defense did about exactly what I expected. Early on, they were able to actually get a stop on the first drive of the game, but then later on, obviously they broke down. Just the depth wore down on the line. The secondary doesn't have the depth, so defensively, almost exactly what I think me and you both expected. Offensively, I think we expected a little more. I think that's the point that this Vanderbilt team was at, is we expected a little bit of the momentum from the NIU game, from that second half, to translate. And to an extent it did. They had one good drive against Alabama, and I guess I'll get to this early, Billy. I've just got to get to it. It's been eating away at me. But the SEC Network stat, they got points early to take away the stupid stat of 5,495 days since Vanderbilt had scored points against Alabama.
I looked at that and I was surprised too. I was like, they don't ever play each other.
The initial stat, first off, it was scoreless. It was 0 points. So then they edited the stat to say touchdowns. But also, they not one time mentioned that was 2 games since 2007, which is the last time Vanderbilt scored, was 2007. But they'd only played 2 times. And one of those was in 2016 against Tua Tagovailoa. So that is the part of SEC Network. That is what I'm talking about. Of yes, Vanderbilt has done some things, whatever. But that part of the broadcast, the disrespect shown towards Vanderbilt, I'll say, since you posed the question, surprising. No, Billy, including the disrespect to Vanderbilt on that broadcast.
Yeah, that felt like a stat, kind of a joke towards Jordan Rodgers almost. And you saw him, and Vanderbilt people everywhere. You saw him kind of marking it out on the telestrator. It just felt like a
I don't know. I don't know what he said during that time. I'd long.
So Jordan Rodgers, I was actually watching still, and he was like, he kept drawing over it so that nobody could see it. So
no, I saw it. I just had the audio turned off because I couldn't listen.
It was classic Jordan Rodgers. We don't want to see that. No one cares about that.
I appreciate that, Jordan.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
Jordan giving some fight to the Vandy fans there, but.
Salute.
But no, well, that's what it felt like. I mean, they probably felt the audience was
I get it. I get it's an inside joke. I get all of that. I get all of it. But it was flashed before the game as well. It was shown in the pregame stuff, and it's just okay. That's
was it really? Stat. Was it flashed before?
Yeah, this was. Well? That's why I said that it was shown beforehand as 0 points total.
Okay, I only saw it.
Then they changed it. They changed it halfway through the game, whenever what you're talking about, Jordan Rodgers coloring over it to no touchdowns because they hit the field goal. So that's when it really started bothering me. And I was like, I feel like they haven't played that many times, because I also had somebody text me and she was like, no, that stat was just mean. Haha. And I was like, okay, I got to dig into this now. I've got to get a response if I'm getting individual text messages about it.
I could hear your anger through your tweet. I mean, it was so obvious.
Because I love stats. But that also makes me very cognizant of the fact of how easily they are manipulated when it comes to these matchup stats. Because I bet there are a lot of teams that have gone 2 games throughout the last 20 years against Alabama in a row without scoring a touchdown. I would be willing to gamble that quite a few have done.
Let's look at the last 2 Mizzou Alabama games, or literally half of the SEC. You could probably say the same thing there, Will. But no, real quick, kind of some of the box score notes that, there's not too much to note. Swann was 13 of 26, 115 yards, no interceptions. So he took care of the ball. He had pressure on him several times, but instead of kind of throwing it up or throwing it out of bounds, he just kind of went to the ground and said, okay, I'm going to take the sack here. So I thought, that I'll get to that in one of my key takeaways. Rocco Griffin, 3 carries for 19 yards. Will Shepherd, 3 catches, 52 yards. And the longest was that 22-yard catch early in the game. That was really the only sign of any sort of life offensively for Vanderbilt. Will, that first, I think it was that first offensive drive. I mean, you saw that fade route and
second offensive drive.
Second offensive
drive. It was the
drive.
second one. Yep.
Because
remember the first offensive drive, Billy, was the very fun Wildcat play that we all agreed with so heavily on the third and 1.
Yeah. So there was another. I think this might have been 4th and 1. Will where AJ Swann was in the gun, and I'm hearing people on Twitter say throw Mike Wright in there. It's like that's a read. AJ Swann can make a read and fake it and run the football. I mean, and he could have gotten that, but it was just a bad read. I mean, that's really. I don't think throwing Mike Wright in there would have solved that much. I mean, it's every quarterback knows how to make a read. Now, I think it is different if you've got a quarterback back there that literally can't run. I mean, but Swann can run, and he could have made that play. So I don't know. I don't think that's on the coaching and not having Mike Wright in the game. But yeah, Will. So let's get to our 3 key takeaways. Like I said, the box score, game recap. There's just not a whole lot to get to, from the surface. And I've got all these sounds. All right. Did you hear that? You didn't hear that? Okay. I had a video playing on ESPN.
I don't hear anything.
Okay. All right. No. We'll edit that out.
Cool.
So, Will, let's go ahead and get to those 3 key takeaways. And I'll start here. I'll go first. And I just mentioned it, AJ Swann's poise. And yeah, I think watching this game, he didn't throw any touchdowns, but he also didn't make any mistakes. He did, I think the score could have been worse. Say AJ Swann fumbles on a sack, careless with the football. Say he tries to force a throw. You didn't see any forced throws. You saw a lot of incompletions, but you didn't see any interceptions. So, and I think going back and looking at this game as a whole, he played the whole game. And I think that, in the moment, it's like, oh, if you're AJ Swann, it's a tough place to learn in Tuscaloosa on the road against Alabama. But you got to do it. And I think the staff, good on them, credit to them for keeping him in the game the entire time, because I mean, you got to believe the kid learned a lot. I mean, you're playing against one of the best defenses in the country. You're going up against a Heisman Trophy finalist on the edge there in Will Anderson. And, you didn't turn the ball over. Yeah, you didn't play particularly great offensively, but you also weren't protected well really at all the entire night. So, Will, first kind of taking the game as a whole, separating it offensively and then going to Swann, I thought he showed poise. I thought he showed some maturity that, most people, I think from the outside, wouldn't expect from a freshman quarterback, especially if they haven't been watching Vanderbilt. But for us, I wasn't surprised. I think a lot of people that watch this program closely and people within the program aren't surprised really anymore by what they see from AJ Swann. So I don't know. This isn't really a positive, but I think it. When you look at the game, I think you look at his poise and say, okay, he didn't hurt you offensively. When he's getting pressured, he kind of just he goes down, doesn't try to force anything. So for me, Will, number one is AJ Swann's poise, kind of, in a vacuum of that game offensively.
Yeah, my keys are going to be a little bit different. So my keys in the preview were very directly related to the game on purpose versus saying like broader reaching moral victories. They were actual keys to victory. So my takeaways are going to do the opposite. My takeaways are going to kind of be broader reaching storylines that I think we are going to hear throughout the rest of the year, and things that are really going to take away and actually impact the remainder of the season. So the first one is going to be the fun topic that I think is already brewing just a little bit with the first not great performance you've seen from AJ Swann, which is the whispers for Mike Wright to see the field, or there are going to be people calling for Mike Wright to be the quarterback. So just to address that as my number one key takeaway, if you are calling for Mike Wright to take a significant number of snaps for this Vanderbilt team, just go ahead, unfollow me personally on Twitter, because the moment Clark Lee named AJ Swann the starter and took away that job from Mike Wright, he now can never go back to Mike Wright playing snaps. He can't put him out in scrub time because he cannot take the risk of Mike Wright coming out there and looking phenomenal against their second or third team. That cannot happen, and throw any type of controversy or dissent into that. So that's number one. It's not going to happen, first off. Clark Lee's already made that decision. Secondly, we said it last year. It's the same thing with Ken Seals. I just think AJ Swann is another level of talent from Ken Seals. No offense to Ken. I think he's going to transfer out somewhere after the season and probably, if he chooses, have a pretty good grad career wherever he goes. But AJ Swann is going to develop, he's a true freshman, into a guy that in the future can allow you to really compete and maybe win some of these games against maybe not Alabama at number 2, but against top tier SEC competition. Not just stay in the game, not just keep it within 28. That is what Mike Wright is going to allow you to do. He's going to pick up some first downs that otherwise wouldn't be picked up, but he's not going to hit the 3rd and 10 laser comeback route that needs to be hit and put on the dime consistently. That is how Vanderbilt is going to beat these teams that are top tier in the SEC, because that'll lead into my second point, which is the takeaway of why Vanderbilt has to have a quarterback with the ability to throw the ball and push the ball down the field and run this read option style with an actual arm and the ability to push it down the field, not through the run game. That's in my second key point and takeaway. But first key point is shut the hell up. AJ Swann is the quarterback, and in 3 years, if that is not the right decision, then just take me off this podcast, because AJ Swann is legit. He is going to develop into a hell of a quarterback, and nothing about that offensive performance would have changed with any other quarterback on that field. Yeah. So that's the key number one for me.
And I think even more importantly, Will, he's got to have guys on the outside that can create opportunities for the offense and for themselves. And we've seen that with Will Sheppard this season. We've seen it at times with Jayden McGowan. We've seen it a couple times with tight ends, but the tight ends haven't been super active with this offense, and that was a point of emphasis coming into the season, utilizing those tight ends more. So that's another thing to watch. But my second key takeaway from this game, Will, and as I said, I'm more kind of going in the mold of you as well, kind of down the stretch of this season. We're not even at the halfway point yet, but where they are at right now, here's what we feel like they need to do. Number 2 for me, that the wide receivers have got to create more opportunities for themselves. And I know it's Alabama, but if Vanderbilt wants to win an SEC game, the wide receivers have to be more aggressive. And yes, I'm talking about Will Sheppard. And I know Jayden McGowan is a really young kid. He's still learning how to be a true receiver as opposed to just kind of catching the ball on an end around and running, for a first down. But these receivers as a whole, I mean, yes, they got to get healthy. We haven't seen Gamarion Carter, much of him. We haven't seen a whole lot of Devin Body the last couple games. But really, Sheppard and McGowan, those two guys, I know it's Alabama. I know we're talking about this after Alabama, and it's easy to look at these types of things and say, oh, here's what they got to do. But I still think Sheppard could have done more in that Alabama game. There was more out there for him in that Alabama game. I know Swann didn't have much time, but I feel like Sheppard, there's an extra level. There's another step for him to achieve, and that's the opportunity out there for him. So, wide receivers, tight ends. I think you can throw the running backs in here as well. Help your guys, AJ Swann, out. Help him out. Whether that's being more physical or going up there and just saying, screw this, I'm making a play. I'm making a play over this DB, and this is towards Sheppard. Be that alpha. And I know we talked about this last episode, Will, but McGowan also. He's had to learn on the fly all season long. So, kind of refining whatever skills he needs to refine to be a true receiving threat. And yes, it's easy, for me to critique the receiving core after a game like Alabama, but I still think, Will, if this team wants to win an SEC game, there's got to be more aggression from the wide receivers as a whole. When the ball's up in the air, go make that play. And so I think the receivers have to step up, but also the tight ends, Will, they need to be more involved. And the running backs as well, out of the backfield. You gotta provide. You gotta give AJ Swann everything he needs, because the protection is a weakness. We know that. So if you can help Swann, help him out. Go out there and make the play. for your freshman quarterback. So help your guy AJ Swann out, but more in particular, those receivers, I think in particular, will they've got to step up. They've got to just create more opportunities for the offense if they want to win an SEC game down the stretch.
Yeah, you're hitting on something kind of in the same position group as my key takeaway three. I think maybe just a little bit different perspective, but I'll go ahead and stick with what I had written down as number two, which is really number one, but just had to get number one out of the way. Games are still won and lost in the trenches on the offensive and defensive lines. And Vanderbilt is still far, 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 far away in the trenches from really competing against top tier teams and really making it a game. Alabama had 5 sacks, 8 tackles for loss. Vanderbilt had no sacks, 3 tackles for loss. Most of those were good plays on the outside, including one play that was really good from CJ Taylor and kind of a 2-on-1 situation out there. But Vanderbilt's offensive line was exposed. They're a little bit thin. They looked tired. They were walking to the line. I think Bruno commented on that, Bruno Reagan, a few times on Twitter. They just looked defeated, and I can't really blame them. They are thin. They are undersized compared to Alabama's defensive line. This is not anything against it. I mean, they were putting everything they had out there, especially those early drives, but eventually they just don't have the guys. They don't have the depth on either side of the ball right now, and that was exposed against Alabama, and that's something that I think we both expected. That's why our predictions were close to 50 points and why we didn't expect Vanderbilt to break into the 20s. Now, I think the line struggled a little bit more than we had hoped because they had given up, like we said before, no sacks going into this game, but I think that was just a little bit of false hope. I think Wake Forest defensive line is their weakness. Their defense is weak, and the rest of the opponents for Vanderbilt have pretty poor defensive lines. So the next couple weeks, maybe not Georgia, but Ole Miss, I think, will be a good litmus test. I think Ole Miss will be a little more realistic. I think that's a closer gauge of talent level. But comparing Vanderbilt's line in the trenches to Georgia and Alabama is just not a recipe for feeling good for any teams in the country, not named maybe Ohio State or Clemson. So that's the part, is all of this taken with the caveat of you just watched Vanderbilt's offensive and defensive lines go up against NFL offensive and defensive lines. I mean, I think both sides for Alabama probably have 4 to 5 dudes that are going to be drafted in the top 2 to 3 rounds at least on that field that Vanderbilt faced. So all of this being said, there is optimism and hope moving forward, which I hope will kind of play into my key takeaway number 3.
Yeah, there's recruiting work to be done. We'll say that, especially in the trenches. And you're right.
Yeah,
Well,
the final stats, I know some of this is calculated differently because it's college, and like the sacks against Swann, he had 6 carries for negative 33 yards. So like that was a fumble recovery, I believe. So that's a little skewed, but Vanderbilt had 14 rushing yards versus Alabama had 238. And the 5 sacks versus 0. So that tells you everything you needed to know about this game before you even start to break down anything Vanderbilt's secondary did or anything Vanderbilt's quarterback did. It's just look at the rushing yardage and look at the sack numbers, and that will tell you everything you need to know about the final score.
Yeah, well, for my last key takeaway here, I'm literally going literally what you said, but the defense in particular, I'm going to kind of single out the defense because we've talked about this, Will. This defense, they're in the right spots. They're very well coached defensively. I think that's even easy to see from a general outside college football fan. I think watching the game, if you're an Alabama fan, whether you're at the game or watching that game, yes, you put up 55 points against Vanderbilt, but it's easy to see for a football guy to say, oh, their defense, they were there to make the play, but they don't have that guy that they need to make that play. They don't have the dudes yet, as you just said. But I'm singling out this defense because down the road, I think the defense is going to be such a strength of this program, because once they get these dudes that Clark Lee can 100% have confidence in sending out there on the field and making plays all game long, as opposed to, yes, you're banged up on the D-line right now. There's not enough depth in the secondary. I think linebackers the one spot we feel good about right now. I mean, yeah, you can use more depth, but the linebacker spot right now, that's I mean, that's not a weak spot of this team, and that I think is up there in the SEC, at least upper half of the SEC in terms of just dudes. I mean, Anthony Orji, Kane Patterson, Ethan Barr, even some younger guys back there. So I say defense. That yes, this is the whole team that they just need dudes. They need the horses. I know we've talked about that, but I think more importantly, defensively, once they get those guys, once they bring the dudes into this defense that that can go out there and consistently make plays and are big enough and are strong enough and are fast enough for this Clark Lee unit to be fully confident in themselves. I mean, the sky's the limit, I think, for this defensive unit. Now, offensively, I think that's a little bit different just because of that's not Clark Lee's pedigree. I know, he was a fullback, but he's been a defensive coach his whole career. So that in and of itself will kind of, besides not even talking really about this Alabama game, but where this team is at, it popped out to me while I was watching the Alabama game and saying, yeah, maybe there are a couple times where they missed a defensive read or were out of position, but the vast majority of the time, these players are in position to make those plays. They just can't physically make them. And so I think that's a next step that I'm excited to watch for this program, Will. And we both know that defensively, last year down the stretch, it was a strength. Now they still gave up points. They would give up points, but you saw it. You could visualize what, these guys are in the right spots. They just need the dudes. And that feels like the bottom line saying the last couple of years, last 3-4 years for Vanderbilt football. But defensively, Will, that's what excites me, I think, the most. Once they get those dudes defensively, that excites me, I think, to watch, to see what a defensive product could be. And yes, they need dudes everywhere, but I particularly saw that in the Alabama game, saying, okay, they're a few years away, 4 years away, maybe even shorter from legitimately competing against the top higher tier SEC teams, I think, defensively.
Yeah, I'll change my number three to be a little bit broader because I like some of the points you made and want to make some comments on them. So I'll go ahead with my title with my key takeaway number three, and that's going to be the pieces of the puzzle are kind of starting to be there. At least some corner pieces are in place. And I think you're seeing the SEC talent puzzle being put together. There are certain guys on this roster that have SEC talent. Obviously, Orji is a guy that at that linebacker position that's older on the roster, but is clearly a guy that anyone else in the SEC would love to have on their roster, including Alabama. I truly believe that. He is going to be a first, second, or third round pick if he can stay healthy. He's had some injury issues in the shoulder that may prevent him from being drafted as highly, but everything else about Orji is a first-round linebacker. Mm-hmm. He is legit. He is the next Vanderbilt linebacker, Chris Marv, Zach Cunningham, go back to Jonathan Goff. So he's incredibly talented. Patterson, you mentioned Barr. They have an SEC linebacker group. As a group, I think moving forward, you'd feel good about that. I think corner pieces as far as youth, McGowan seems to be legit. There was one play in particular. He was hit in the backfield and managed to break 2, 3, 4 tackles from Alabama defenders and get the ball back to the line of scrimmage. That counts as no yards in the box score. But that was a play that you see legit SEC players from Georgia, Texas A&M, these 4 5-star guys make. It's just slipping tackles when it looks like that Alabama should have you for a loss of 7. You're able to get back to the line of scrimmage, and that's a huge play. But the main thing is on the receiver group is I already touched on the trenches. That's where really the main issue is. But you mentioned Shepard. He is going to see over-the-top safety help so heavily against every single SEC team that he sees because they don't have the Chris Boyd to Jordan Matthews. Mm-hmm. They don't have the guy on the outside, on the other side that doesn't allow the single high safety or the entire defense to shift over towards his side. You're just not going to have the fade routes there down the field, even if your line is able to protect you, because they're just going to slide the safety over. They're not scared of anybody else on that other side being able to consistently go up and beat one-on-one coverage, even McGowan. Just because of McGowan's size, he's shown he's turnover prone. I don't think any SEC team is going to be afraid of their corner being matched up one-on-one with late safety help or late backer help coming over against McGowan, just because they know Vanderbilt's not going to send McGowan over the middle because they don't want to get him killed. So that limits what you're able to do with your slot receiver when you don't want to be sending him over the middle. And Jonathan Krause made a living opening up the outside for Chris Boyd and Jordan Matthews by taking those tough catches over the middle that aren't glory catches, but are 8 to 12 yards that loosen up that outside for guys that can make those big plays. So these are the corner pieces that I'm talking about. Is eventually McGowan is going to get a little bit bigger. He's going to learn the playbook better. They're going to be able to utilize him better. And he's going to be a hell of a playmaker. Right now, he's a little bit limited because of size. Shepard is going to look uninvolved and like he's just not in the game because you're going to have to scheme ways to get him the ball. That's what they were trying to do. They were putting bunch formations, trips formations on one side of the field with Shepard all alone on the single side, and they were still shifting safety help over to Will Shepard because they know he's the only true offensive weapon on Vanderbilt's roster right now. And that's just the facts of it. Now, they need a number 2 or number 3 guy to step up as a consistent target for Swann. Is that going to be the tight ends? Bresnahan has been non-existent. I think we both expected him to kind of have a little bit bigger of a year and a lot more involvement. And Schoenwald, I think, has caught more passes than Bresnahan, which is certainly not the role we expected for him. So far, we haven't seen it out of the tight ends, which we thought might be able to replace that number 2 production out of a wide receiver. Quincy Skinner Jr. hasn't been able to stay on the field. And other than that, you have a lot of guys that are pretty unproven. So McGowan is young, but he's a piece. Will Shepard, obviously legit SEC receiver, but you're missing that number 2 guy. You're missing the wide receiver depth. It's the same thing. You have some pieces in place, but for the most part right now, Vanderbilt is just facing a Jimmy's and Joe's problem, not an X's and O's problem. As much frustration as we want to have with calls and missed face masks, it wouldn't have made a difference in the grand scheme of things. Maybe how it appears on that final scoreboard. But right now, it's just Barton Simmons, Clark Lee just getting the dudes in there and the ability to actually scheme how they want to scheme.
Yeah, and well, I think we talk about getting Jimmy's and Joe's. I think we saw it in the Hawaii game. They took that step, that we felt like they needed to take. Yes, there's still so much work to be done in terms of, like last year they were in the cellar. Now, okay, you're at the basement now. You're at that bottom. Now let's take that next step. Maybe that's later this year. Maybe that's next year. But you have to stack recruiting classes. That's anyone saying, oh, this year that's the year to see it, to visualize it. It's like, no, you need to stack. You have to wait 2, 3, maybe even 4 years to really see what Clark Lee has in this vision. So that's the 3 key takeaways. Will, I want to real quick before we end. I know it's a shorter episode. I want to kind of project out towards this season, the end of this season. I know I say end of the season. It's not even, we're not even at the halfway point yet, but down the stretch of this season, SEC play is here. I think for me, Will, this team, we know what we know about this team. Alabama didn't change anything for me. I wasn't surprised by what I saw. Yes, I saw some small things that, I think down the road this team could learn from, and maybe that helps them get an SEC win down the road. But a couple things for me, Will, watching this team, they've got to find ways in the secondary to hide those weaknesses. I know they don't have the Jimmys and Joes, but if you do want to beat a Missouri who has a pretty good passing attack with Brady Cook and Luther Burden at Mizzou, South Carolina with Spencer Rattler, those are not pushovers in terms of passing production. So I don't know what it is, Will. I don't know what it is, but and this is again why I don't envy Clark Lee right now. But whatever you have to do right now to limit those chunk plays, those 60, 70, 80-yard plays offensively where it just kills you. It murders any sort of offensive momentum that you have because the same offense you're facing is doing the same exact thing. So that's what I'll say firstly, Will, is defensively, they've got to get so creative this year because they don't have the Jimmys and Joes yet. And I think down the road, this seems odd. The staff, they're not going to have to get as creative as they are getting this year. The staff is probably learning new ways how to coach football with the talent they have. So I'll say that, Will, defensively.
Remember, they were missing McGowan. as well in this game, which doesn't help.
McGowan.
So
Oh,
they missed.
Mahoney.
They haven't had Mahoney. Good
Yeah, yeah.
God, yeah, Mahoney. They were missing Mahoney
Right.
in that defensive backfield for the second half of that NIU game and
Yeah.
this Alabama game. So I'm sure
Which,
that limited some things in the
yes.
secondary, and already very thin and inexperienced secondary, missing their most experienced and probably best coverage
Yeah.
guy in the whole group.
I
That
will
was a
say,
part that wasn't we did not talk about that enough going into
no.
the game.
That's one thing we didn't talk about enough. Mahoney.
Yeah,
That's a pretty
we like
pretty big,
casually mentioned it, and I was like, oh, that's
yeah,
a pretty big deal.
pretty big blow. So
Yeah.
Mahoney, that's huge. If he can go against Ole Miss, that'll be huge. If not, though, you're going to need him against either Mizzou or South Carolina or any of those games down the stretch if you want to have a shot.
Well, you need to get pressure. I mean, how often did you see Bryce Young just standing in there and being able to just take his pick, third, fourth read into whatever pass play they were running? It's going to be tough for any secondary to
Yeah,
cover when you're unable to get pressure, and that's the part. This defensive line at some point has to make the quarterback uncomfortable. We always talk about the quarterbacks not missing throws against Vanderbilt compared to other games you watch. Well, that's the
they're
difference.
comfortable.
They're comfortable in the pocket. They're not getting hit. They don't have people coming at them constantly in every play. So finding a way to get pressure and to limit the big plays, it's going to probably not limit the big plays, but it's going to limit the little plays. You just have to be aggressive. And you know your secondary cannot cover for more than two seconds in the pocket. You just have to send it. And if teams make big plays repeatedly, at least you're not going to tire out your line. And that's the main problem right now is you're doing neither. You're playing more of a soft zone coverage, and they're picking up 8 to 14 yards at a time. And while also scoring relatively quickly, you're also adding up the plays and snaps for your defensive line and backers and getting them tired so they wear down throughout the game. So either give up the big plays or don't. Either send pressure or don't. The soft coverage and everything, I get it. I know why you have to do it, but cut it out. You've just got to be aggressive. I know you're going to get beat. We all know that the Vanderbilt secondary is not going to be able to play one-on-one consistently against these elite offenses and elite receivers. But at a certain point, you just have to say I would rather die by one giant blow than by 1,000 small cuts.
Yeah, make it a little bit easier on the fans watching. But no, well, I agree. I mean, you're going to have some YOLO in you defensively for Vanderbilt. Howell, Coach Lee. I mean, I think that's what you're going to. I think they know that. I think you're going to have to do that to pick off somebody down the stretch in the SEC this year. I thought it was interesting though too. Will, we saw freshmen consistently playing in that second half. I mean, you saw Jeffrey Hugo in there, Steven Senianiola, of course, Darren Agu, Iso Taha played a lot more. I mean, we saw him, that big body. He was the one guy that I think looked like physically could match up with Alabama. Just
was
where
that
he
number
is.
9?
Nah, so no, number 9 was Christian James. I heard Christian James had his jersey ripped, and so they gave him Davion Davis's number 9 jersey.
Because they had that listed on ESPN as they still have it recorded as Davis's tackles. I was like, that was not Davion Davis. Unless so I am really, really wrong about this roster. I had to do a double take on the box score afterwards because I must have missed something pretty big.
I saw a lot of questions on Twitter about who is number 9. Who is
number people 9? Were tagging. I think somebody tagged me in a tweet that was like, "Who is number 9?" And I was
you were like, I don't know. But no,
I don't want to give it the wrong answer.
Yeah, so I figured it out. I knew it was Christian James' body, but I was trying to figure out what happened. So I think somebody told me that it was Davion Davis.
It's like the single digit running back like numbers make the player look better than they did in like number 42. It's the same thing with James and number 9, the single digit.
It's like, oh, who's that?
Lineman number. He just looks like a monster. He looks like a physical specimen because he's in the single digit number.
Vandy needs more single digits. It's got to give all the linemen single digits. But no, Will. Obviously, we knew this was going to be a shorter episode. I know Ole Miss is coming up in 2 weeks, but I think Vanderbilt. I know Ole Miss has a great passing attack, but they lost Matt Corral. There's no more Matt Corral walking through that door. And Jackson Dart, I know they put up 42 against Georgia Tech, but Georgia Tech just fired their coach, so I don't know that that's. And they beat Tulsa by 7. So
Ole Miss is definitely more human than Georgia or Alabama.
Yeah,
I think that's a good way to put
it. Vanderbilt has more of a chance, and we're not going to predictions yet or anything, but I think Vanderbilt matches up a lot better. And then, I mean, it's obvious saying that, but well, real quick here, what kind of early line do you think we could see Vandy and Ole Miss here in a couple weeks?
man, that's a tough one. I think the
Mr.
over
Vegas.
under the over under on that game is going to be high. I
Yes.
think that's going to be close to
Defense
70.
optional.
I would guess. I think that probably after the performance Ole Miss had, I would say like 28 and a half. I would say right around that 4 touchdown, 28, 29. This is a guess. I don't know if there's anything out there yet.
Yeah. Well,
It's
and
a
you got to
couple weeks
see, you
away,
got to
but
wait till the Kentucky game too on Saturday because they
mhm.
face Kentucky at home. So that's going to be a big part of it, I think.
That's going to
But
shape the line because I don't
yeah,
think Vegas knows what to do with Ole Miss.
no.
I think they've been around 20. I think they were like 22 and a half point favorites the last couple weeks against
Yeah,
their
and
opponents, which
they're
is like
favored by
that is
4
that's
against
the
Kentucky.
ultimate. Yeah, the 22 and a half point line against the teams like Georgia Tech is like the ultimate. We have no idea what
Yep.
this team is
Yep.
or how they are going to play because that's a very safe spot like you because people will look at that line. It's a little too
No
much for
man's
people to
land.
feel comfortable. Yeah, it's that 22-point line. So that is usually Vegas's ultimate, like, we don't know kind of spot. So
And that means you don't
I
bet.
would guess I would guess take whatever the we don't know. And when Vanderbilt's playing, add a touchdown to that. And that's usually where I come up with that 28, 29-point line.
Yeah, I would say lowest 20, 3 touchdowns, but highest I think it could get in the 30s. I think
Well,
especially if Ole Miss beats
Kentucky, I
Kentucky.
mean, NIU played Kentucky
Yeah,
very,
they
very tough
beat
in
them
that
by
game.
10. Yeah, I think it was 10,
It
10
was
point
close.
margin, I
Yeah.
think. So NIU is a better team than I think a lot of the outsiders were saying after Vanderbilt beat them. Someday Vanderbilt will get credit for holding off NIU and beating them from the rest of the country. But
That was an incredible second half performance. I
oh, I
think
mean,
that taking a step back, you always root for the teams. Like I was rooting pretty heavily for Wake Forest to beat Clemson because it always makes your game look a little better.
I think no
Hawaii has
matter
not been
what,
easy to root for, but NIU playing Kentucky down to the wire, I think even casual
the week
and
before,
SEC football fans, they will notice that. That's something that you look at Vanderbilt's record, they got their butt kicked by Alabama, but Vanderbilt is 3-2 with 2 of their losses being to top 20 opponents.
yeah.
That's not a bad.
And
They don't have
the key
anything you would
phrase
consider a bad loss. I mean, yeah, you got your butt kicked by Bama. So what, man? What's
that's
the difference?
that's
Our prediction, whatever.
that's the key phrase. You got your butt kicked by Bama. There's going to be a whole lot of other teams that say that at the end of this year. I mean, I
2016 was a good team for Vanderbilt. 2011 was a good team for Vanderbilt. Both of them got their ass kicked by Alabama. I
yeah,
mean, that's just it. Alabama is Alabama. They've kicked a lot of teams' asses that have gone on. They have
yep.
kicked teams' asses in the national championship.
They beat
Notre Dame, but
yeah.
there are plenty of times that has happened. Ohio State. That is what they do. That is a different level of talent, and unfortunately, in the week after Ole Miss, you play another team that has that same different level of talent. That
Same
you're basically
DNA.
playing a low tier professional football team. Like you're playing a team that would probably, I don't know, I don't want to put any hate on it. Bruno might disagree if he ever listens to this. I would be curious to see like his thoughts on Alabama versus
The
a pretty
Birmingham,
good,
the Birmingham
yeah, the
Stallions.
Birmingham squad. Is it the squadron? Is it the Birmingham
Well,
squadron
it's
or
the
whatever? I don't
Birmingham
know.
Stallions, but I forgot what team Bruno's on.
Yeah, whatever his team. I would be curious because he's played against both. So like
Yeah.
he would probably be the guy to know. I may tweet at him and see what he says. But those Alabama and Georgia teams, if they would compete or win, or how they would do in that
And
competition
that's
level. But
yeah, and
I think
that's
they would do pretty well.
yeah, I think so too. That's what we said. Will come into this game. This is Alabama and this is Georgia. These preview pods, they're not going to be, this is not going to shape. We're not going to let this one game or this 2 games let us shape what we think about this team this year. But it's interesting though. You get the open date. You get 2 weeks to prepare for a home game at 3 o'clock against Ole Miss. So that's coming up in 2 weeks. And then Vanderbilt goes. Do they go to Athens? I think they go to Athens to play Georgia. I always forget
Yeah,
which
because
one
the
is. Yeah.
yes,
Okay, so they do go to
because the
Athens.
game last year,
Yes. Yeah.
I got to see that in person. So yeah, I won't
Yeah.
forget that. That was
Good for
fun.
you. Good for
I mean,
you.
they did have the score against Bama, 55-3. I felt like a real 55-3, like what we said, like shooting
Yeah. Yeah.
a real 115 or 120, a real 120 out on the golf course. Is it good? No. Yeah, I mean, you shot plus 40, plus 50, but you
But it was
really
real.
shot it. Like you really tapped in a couple pars. You maybe knocked in one birdie. You had a few quadruple bogeys. It happens, a few triple bogeys, but you shot a real 110, 115. And so that's a step forward. Do it maybe with a little more offensive production against Georgia. The expectations against Ole Miss, especially after seeing them the early part of the season, are a little bit higher. And those expectations are not just going to be don't get your butt absolutely kicked up and down the field. The expectations for Ole Miss, I want to see some things. I want to see some improvement. I want to see some scheme, things that they do to stop that unique offense out of Lane Kiffin and the Lane train rolling in. So that preview, I think, will be a little more interesting to people, and maybe a few more will tune in than to the Alabama preview or the Alabama recap, because I don't blame you if you haven't sat here and listened to us recap a 55-3 game here for Vanderbilt versus Alabama. I get it, and I think you get it too, Billy.
Yeah, we get it. Relax, we get it. But real quick, Will, before we end it,
we're not mad.
Shout out to Joe Bolas. He went back to T-Town and hit a field goal to make it, to not let Vanderbilt get shut out, 55-3. So got to give a shout out to Big Leg Joe. I think, was that his second of the year, Will? Second field goal of the year? I think it was. So I think, we talked about it. He had hit one already in the year before Alabama. So second one of the year.
Well, we both predicted him to get at least one field goal.
Yes, we did.
It's just we expected the offense to do something. Yeah. And I do want to say, and there was one play, number 13. The name just always slips my mind. Yes, he had one bounce off his hands. I think it was CJ Taylor. He made some really good plays, but that soft coverage they were playing had him. I know the play you're talking about. Yep. And that is the pick six, and this is where the little things. So this is the tiny little things, like when they played Alabama in 2016. People call me crazy, but that ball bouncing off of Jared Pinkney's hands, I can still see it for an Alabama interception. It's things early will change the entire feeling of the game. It's the Mike Wright pick against Wake Forest. It's that. So there are just small little parts of the game. If he takes that back, picks it off, it doesn't bounce off his hands. It's 10-7. Vanderbilt's kicking off, and the whole momentum of the game is different. So, but that was the frustrating part. I wanted to get this in. I didn't say it earlier, but the frustration of fans, which I get it. I want to see more aggression. But Clark Lee and that defensive staff, they baited Bryce Young into doing what they wanted him to do early. He got comfortable against the soft coverage, and you had the underneath guy cut that out route or stop route off that would have been up the sideline for 6. I mean, you cannot bait a Heisman quarterback and Nick Saban more into what Vanderbilt was able to do. And you saw it on their faces that it's like, we did it. And we got the shot to take the lead against Alabama with the pick 6 and just couldn't haul it in. So it wouldn't have made a difference in the grand scheme of things and the outcome of the game. But those are the little things that just kind of shape the course of the game that I think would be viewed just a little bit differently. Could you have imagined? Could you have imagined pick 6? Vandy takes a 10-7 lead in the first quarter. Oh, the rest of the SEC, nice. They would have been shaking in their boots after that. The eyes would have opened. Well, maybe not the worst thing, because I think maybe more people would have turned it on and started watching, and then Alabama would have been pissed off because they were sleepwalking early in that game. Yeah, I don't really know how that would have gone. They looked pretty disinterested early. Yeah. But Derrick Wright also, that dude was flying around. He definitely stood out as well. Yeah. You've been listening to episode 182 of the Door Report, powered by Alaco Fine Wood Floors.